So humans have like hormones, right? Humans produce these things called hormones, right? And those hormones allow us to produce different kinds of hormones, right? Serotonin, um, all sorts of hormones that you know that help with like that make us like this very complex that make us the most like complex beings on this planet. Essentially, I think what makes the difference between us and like other less evolved beings would be hormones, right? And how human beings are able to like regulate those hormones, like those complex hormones, and manage them and regulate them. That's what separates us from a beast. Essentially, a beast is untamed, is wild, is like this creature that cannot. Wild represents lack of like regulation. Do you understand? So they lack regulation. They cannot regulate their hormones, at least in a civil way, or what we consider civil. Do you understand? So our hormones are like very very key to like what makes us human. If you remove those hormones from human beings, we won't be different from any wild animal you could think of, right? So this morning I asked ChatGPT about how the organisms with like the top 10 hormones on planet Earth, there's this like there's an interview I watched about Steve Jobs where he said that he read a magazine where they were measuring like the efficiency of locomotion essentially in all the animals on planet Earth, and then they measured all the animals and how efficient they were locomotively, and I think he said the condor was number one or something, and then mankind, human beings were like very very, they were nowhere to be found on that scale, because human being was not very efficient with energy, especially in locomotion, in movement essentially. And then somebody was like in the experiment, somebody was like, you know what, let's try putting human beings on a bicycle. And then they added human beings on a bicycle, and then they discovered that human beings were like the most efficient. The human beings essentially blew the condor out of the water in terms of like how efficient we are at locomotion. So essentially, I think the same thing can be said with hormones, right? Human beings are like these very complex beings because of our hormones, right? So it's our hormones that make us like that makes us very efficient essentially. And then we have this also very complex circadian rhythm that we have, that this night and sleep cycles, right? And then we have this thing called eyes that we use to like, that triggers like the hormone regulation, that essentially manages the circadian rhythm, triggers the hormones, right? The eyes, right? So I was thinking, right, if human beings were like more evolved beings, right? Let's say we lived on a planet, if we were more evolved, like if we were just more evolved than we were, right? And then we lived on a planet that was like, for instance, on Earth we have a rhythm of night and darkness, right? So you have 12 hours of light, you have 12 hours of darkness. In some places on Earth, it is not always like that. In some places on Earth, it's just like you have periods that is just pure light, and then another prolonged period of just pure darkness. But that's not like most of the Earth. That's like a small part of the Earth, right? But in most parts of the Earth, you have like 12 hours of light and 12 hours of darkness, right? And then your body has to adapt to that, right? I think circadian rhythm, right? Okay, cool. But imagine we lived on a planet where there was no night. It was just like 24 hours of like light, essentially. There was no night. Do you understand? We would essentially need, and because there was no night here, there was like a lot of light, yeah, a lot of light, right? Just blinding light. And if there's no night, right, of course we would need, we would not sleep essentially because there's no night. And then so we would need like, we would need another method of like managing energy, and you will need a different definition to like our circadian rhythm, if you will, right? So I was just thinking about it, yeah. And then I asked ChatGPT all these things, and it was like, yeah. It was like correlating it, and then like he hit me. Do you understand? Like, if you think about like a planet that does not have any night, it's just constantly day, right? They don't sleep there, right? Which planet is that? Well, heaven, right? Heaven, there's no light in heaven. There's no night in heaven. They don't sleep there. They're constantly awake. Do you understand? Now, if you look at the beings that are in heaven, right? The angels in heaven, especially the ones that were described by Ezekiel, the ones in the book of Revelation, right? They have a lot of eyes. You know, the cherubim, the seraphim, and the Ophanim, right? All those beings, they have like a lot of eyes. And you're like, like you start wondering about the anatomy of like the anatomy. And it just makes sense because they are living in a planet where there's no night. Yeah. So they might need, you know, all those like photoreceptors on their bodies to regulate their, you know, their circadian rhythm. I don't know how to explain it. Like, you know, so it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense that, and you know, they are constantly moving. They are constantly, according to, and you know, the presence of God, there's like constant light, blinding light. Do you understand? Blinding light. So there's no darkness. They don't have time to sleep, right? So if you're being in that kind of environment, right, you would need more than two eyes. You would need a lot. You need eyes all over your body, like on your whole skin, to just like, you know, to be sensitive to the different wavelengths of light. And because you cannot sleep, you're always praising God. You're always moving up and down. You know, you need constant crazy stuff. Yeah. You need constant. Yeah. And then the Bible talks about how, like, those beings, right? Because they are constantly in the presence of God, right? And their whole body is covered with light, yeah. Now, to prevent, like, sensory overload, right? They have, like, 6 wings. And they use 2 of those wings to cover their body. Why are they covering their body? Darkness, you understand? For regulation, because they don't have a night or day cycle, right? So they are emulating like the circadian rhythm with like the wings. Do you fucking get it? Crazy stuff. Oh my God. Like, oh Jesus. Yeah. And that's why the Bible says that like what is man that thou art mindful of him? You have made him a little lower than the angels, which means the anatomy of a human being is not that far from an angel, right? Their anatomy is just like, it's just like more evolved than our own, right? There's a lot of things I want to say about this topic, but yeah, maybe I'll write the book after I finish this fairy tale, all these story books that I'm writing here. I make like this short story book, right? I'm going to write another book. I'll call it The Anatomy of an Angel. And I'm going to try to like piece together with the help of God, like the anatomy of what an angel, you know, the anatomy, their body, their especially those ones in the presence of God, those Ophanims, those cherubims, those like, you know, it's okay, yeah.